And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, this time alongside with me is Jon Gunnarsson broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, Jon.
Hi there. It does work finally.
It
James is
does work
finally with us.
finally. I think we do owe everyone an explanation here. James had some small minor issue that caused him to be a little bit late. And as we were preparing to just pre-record it and then upload it at a later date, maybe tomorrow or something like that, James just suddenly popped up and said, "Oh, hey guys, I'm here, please." so, that's kind of a bit unfortunate. Anyway, how's been the weather lately?
It's been pretty good. Nothing unusual or spectacular. It's like some good days, some bad days.
In this part of Europe, it just continuously rained, and the weather has been worse and worse as days went by throughout this week. It started very well as a very nice week, and then as we approach the end of the week, it's just gotten worse and worse. Today, at the very least, we were spared of raining, but still remarkably cold. I mean, the perceived temperature by the human body went as low as 4 degrees Celsius. The actual temperature was probably a bit higher, but not by much.
That's rough.
Yeah, that's rough. All right. So since we're in a delay and we're probably not going to end at the usual hour, but nevertheless, let's try. Let's go straight to the news. The first one, oh, only bad news, coming from Yahoo News. Father loses Supreme Court battle over taking daughter on holiday during term time. A father has lost a landmark battle at the UK's highest court over taking his daughter out of school on an unauthorized holiday during term time. John Platt has said he was not at all surprised at the Supreme Court decision, which comes after a legal dispute between education chiefs and Mr. Platt, who took his daughter on a 7-day trip to Disney World in Florida back in 2015 without her head teacher's permission. 5 judges unanimously allowed an appeal by education chiefs against an earlier ruling that Mr. Platt had not broken the law. He was prosecuted by the Isle of Wight Council after refusing to pay an initial £60 fine. After local magistrates found there was no case to answer, the authority then took its case to the High Court in London. There, 2 judges upheld the magistrate's decision and declared that Mr. Platt was not acting unlawfully because his daughter had a good overall school attendance record of over 90%. They said the magistrates were entitled to take into account the wider picture of the child's attendance record outside of the dates she was absent on the holiday. The decision caused a surge in term time bookings all over England. The council then asked the Supreme Court justice, including the court's president, Lord Neuberger, I guess, to overturn the High Court decision, saying it raises important issues over what constitutes regular attendance at school. The High Court ruling in May last year cleared Mr. Platt for failing to ensure his daughter attended school regularly as required by Section 444-1 of the Education Act of 1996. Mr. Platt's request for permission to take his daughter out of school was refused by her head teacher. After the holiday, he was issued with a fixed penalty notice, but he did not pay the £60 by the initial deadline and was sent a further invoice for £120, which he also did not pay. At a Supreme Court hearing in January, the local authority, backed by the Education Secretary, argued that a child's unauthorized absence from school for even a single day or even half a day can amount to a criminal offense. But a QC for Mr. Platt described the submission as a new and radical interpretation of the law, which was absurd and would criminalize parents on an unprecedented scale. So basically, the child is not part of your family. It's part of the family of the state, because apparently now the state gets more of a say than you do.
Yeah, basically the state owns the child at least in the mornings and the early afternoons, and only once school is out you actually get control of your child back.
Yeah, and it is further interesting, and I've learned this by reading the comments, because of course the media would never tell you this. All of this insanity only applies if you're either poor enough or stupid enough, in the case of Mr. Platt, stupid enough to actually submit you to actually take your child to a taxpayer funded school. It doesn't apply to private schools. You know, in private schools, rules of sanity still do apply, which say that you actually get to negotiate, and if you still don't get to an actual result, you can just get the hell out of there, and there's not an issue. But in state schools, you don't get any of these choices.
I mean, at a private school, as a parent, you're a customer, and you're treated like one. It's um, whereas at a state school, you're not a customer. You don't pay for the school. I mean, you pay indirectly for it through taxes, but you're not, in an ordinary sense, a customer that the school has to please in some way.
Mhm.
So, I mean, this is sort of an indication of what public schools are supposed to do. It's not just about serving children and parents and providing them an education, but also the point is that children should attend regularly so that they can be indoctrinated regularly, because otherwise it doesn't work quite as well.
Yeah, I've had this discussion with someone from the education ministry here in Romania, and he was very pissed at me when I told him that, look, mate, the education system actually works just fine. The only problem that some of us have is some members of the public actually have is that the public assumes that the purpose is something else other than the indoctrination. Because yes, at its quote unquote stated purpose, it doesn't work that well, but at its real purpose, which is indoctrination, it works just fine.
It's,
It's
it's,
doing
it's
it.
not and it's not so much about stated purpose. I mean, if you look um, at the earliest public school systems, they were actually quite explicit about the
Yes.
purpose of the school being, at least a large part, to be indoctrination, to bring up children and to form their character, to form their opinions in a way that would be conducive to the interests of the state. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's actually still the case that that this is sort of that is officially admitted in a lot of countries. I mean, like in Germany, for example, there's a lot of stuff in the constitution, even of various states governments, that they're supposed to educate children about the advantages of democracy and to bring them up um, to be a God-fearing people, as it's phrased in the Bavarian constitution. Um, these sorts of indoctrination aims are actually, in many cases, openly admitted to, but people these days, they don't really want to see that. So they just want to think of public schools as like purely educational, but purely teaching people valuable skills and so on. But that's not the case. It's also, of course, teaching valuable skills is also part of what is with public school, but indoctrination is a very important aspect, because if that weren't the case, then why would governments provide public schools themselves?
Yeah.
Like, um,
Food is important too, and yet governments aren't really keen in providing it.
yeah, and if people are on welfare, the government doesn't provide food to them directly. They give them money so they can buy food, or they give them food stamps so they can buy food, which is produced and sold by private firms.
Yeah. But education, Freudian slip, is deemed so important that it has to be directly provided by the state.
Yep.
Yeah. The thing is that this has been a very long trend, and again, I'll have to take a jab at our Anglo friends, because it's in many cases a lot worse in England or in Britain in general than it is in the rest of Europe. Now, Germany might be a very good contender. I'll have to admit that. But it's still, in England at the very least, it has been a very long trend towards this. I mean, and it all started going downhill when the so-called grammar schools were abolished. and basically the older quote unquote Victorian model of education, which was also authoritarian, but at the very least you had multiple authoritarian structures competing with each other. So the parents still had quite a lot of choice. But then when the government became fully involved in everything that pertains to education, even in private schools, in many of them, the government still has a disproportionate amount of say of what's going on there. This is a very long trend, and this Supreme Court decision is basically just another step into the very long and very consistent trend of establishing complete authority of the state over children.
Yeah, and I mean the argument sort of seems to be that if we allow this, then lots of people will take their children out of school so they can book a holiday in an off season and pay a lot less.
Yeah, so
And yeah, the thing is, so what? I mean, if you miss like a week of school, it's not really the end of the world. It's not a big deal.
it's not even if you miss 3 weeks. I mean, it really isn't. And to go even further with the argument, I would go as far as to say, even if they miss, if even if they miss 2 months, because in many cases, especially in these, especially in private schools and especially long before university, you have many periods in which nothing really of substance happens. Uh, and again, at the end of the day, there should still be some of this some of this yes assumption. But then at the end of the day, the parent gets the last word, and not the state, not the head teacher, not the headmaster, or whatever the titles they award themselves now. Um, and when your society is far more authoritarian than Soviet Union, maybe you should ask yourself what a thing or two. You see, back in the Soviet Union, if you wanted to take your kid to a vacation, let's say you earned one or whatever, there was really not an issue. There was definitely not a question of criminal prosecution because, oh my God, you left, you took your kid to a vacation for a week, or the kid missed a week of school because of him or her going in a vacation with his or her parents. There was never an issue. It was never considered an issue, especially not an issue in which the Supreme Court would get involved. I mean, it's just uh, that would in itself would have been regarded as silly and extreme, and definitely not something that they would do. I mean, not even the Soviet Union would go that far.
Yeah, and I mean it's just not really a big deal if you miss a longer period of time in school. If you're reasonably motivated, you can definitely catch up. Like I had a friend in school who went in the same class as me. He uh, he went on a sort of an exchange program or something like that, where he went to South Africa for a whole year. So he was there. I mean, he went to school there in South Africa, but they had very different curricula um, and so on. So he learned some stuff, but not necessarily stuff that he would have learned during that year at school in Germany. And he came back and he basically like skipped that year, and he was fine. It was fine.
Yeah,
He caught up quite quickly, and it was not a problem.
yeah.
As long as you're reasonably motivated to do that, it's not that hard. I mean, the sort of pace at which the new material is learned is not actually that high in schools.
Yeah, because they're modeled upon the lowest common denominator.
Yeah,
And even in this particular case, I mean, it's not the case that this guy's daughter was, the uh, lowest performing student who would rarely attend school to begin with and whatnot. Quite the opposite. It was a student that would consistently go to school over 90% of the time, as the court papers quoted in this article say. So it's definitely the case that this is an overblown reaction by the judiciary, backed let's be honest, by the teachers unions, because almost every country has this problem. The teachers unions, the state, the taxpayer funded teachers unions have this huge lobby at their disposal.
yep.
And I don't know if there is well, definitely there is no solution, but I don't know if there is an acceptable trade-off uh, that can easily be implemented easily in the terms of everyone else, to just start dismantling at least some of the power that these these teachers unions have accumulated for themselves.
I think it
Because
would.
sorry, go ahead.
I think it would have to start with sort of demystifying education. We have this sort of idea that education is sacred, that anything that touches education is in and of itself evil, and more education is always better. And you can
Mhm.
see this in discussions of public spending. There's basically never anyone who proposes to cut funding for education.
Yeah.
That just almost never happens. It's always, we need more funding for education. We need more funding. We need more funding. We need more funding, and it's really difficult to argue against it, because as soon as you argue against it, then people say, you want people to be stupid. You want children to not learn
Yeah, but
anything. You want
they are already stupid, so.
yeah. I mean, they're not learning very much really in schools.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
mean, a lot of
precisely.
the stuff they learn is really not that useful. I mean, uh, is it really that useful to know the difference between a metaphor and metonymy? Or I don't know, is it really that useful to have read a Shakespeare play, or to know the difference between a logarithm and algorithm? I mean, it would be nice to know all these things, but it's not really essential. You can live
Yeah.
a happy and fulfilled life without knowing these things.
It's not
Um,
like 99.9% of the history of humanity. Everyone lived a very happy life without knowing these things.
yeah, there's a lot of this is sort of assumption that there's this general font of knowledge that everyone needs to possess to be a functional member of society. Um, that's one thing I think is actually very narrow. I mean, to be a reasonably functional member of society, you need to know how to read, how to write, how to do basic arithmetic, and
That
that's
would be pretty much
pretty
it. Yeah.
much it. And everything else is sort of optional. It sort of depends on what you want to do in your life. If you um, don't want to learn about how to change a tire on your car, you don't have to. You can just pay someone to do it.
Yeah.
If you don't want to learn how to um, I don't know, fix a broken toaster, you can pay someone to do it. You can just like buy a new toaster because they're really cheap.
Yeah.
We have this thing called the division of labor. It's the basis of civilization. Basically, this is what makes us so productive.
Yeah. It's a very
And
cool thing. Yeah.
to be able to be a functional member of society, you need to have a very in-depth knowledge of a particular field to be able to make a living in that. If you're a high school English teacher, you definitely need to know the difference between metaphor and metonymy. But if you're an electrical engineer, you don't need to know that.
Yeah.
If you're a computer programmer, you definitely need to know the differences between an algorithm and a logarithm.
Yeah.
But if you're a plumber, you don't.
True. And I would go even one step further and say that even under the current paradigm, I mean, if you ask the 45, 50-year-olds there, what do they remember from school? By and large, they tend to remember reading, writing, basic arithmetic, and the things that they learned about the topic that they made a career of. And that would be pretty much it. They won't remember the irrelevant stuff. I mean, do you really think that 50-year-old engineers remember anything from their literature classes in their 8th grade or the 7th grade? I don't think so.
Yeah, like almost everything you forget. I mean, there's some stuff you retain, but it's mostly stuff that you end up using later on in life,
Yeah.
and that you
Which you
hear again and then again later on in life. And most people, for example, um, know the year dates of, say, World War II, because it's something that comes up a lot in all sorts
Mhm.
of fictional portrayals uh, in the news when there's some sort of anniversary of, I don't know, the beginning or the end of World War II, something like that. That's something that you counter again and again. And so that's something that you retain from school, but if you hadn't learned it in school, you would have learned it afterwards anyway. So what's
Yeah.
the point?
Yeah. Yes, but yeah, I think I can agree with definitely with this, that probably the first step would be to demystify this sacred cow of education. Maybe that could indeed lead to cut back some of the power, especially the power, not necessarily the funding, but definitely the power of these teachers unions, because there is such thing as teachers unions in the private sector too, but they don't seem to be that noisy, and they don't seem to be um, that influential in terms of public policy. But quite the opposite. They're usually, could you please leave us alone? We're doing a very good job. Thank you very much. Leave us the fuck alone. Um, but yeah, these teachers unions, they're getting, and this is true in all countries. I mean, all countries have this problem, but apparently in Britain is so serious that they get to influence the Supreme Court, and they get to basically persuade the court to declare criminals parents who take their children to a vacation. That's insane. And you know what's even more insane? If you read through the comment section, there's a significant minority of comments that defend the court's decision. They're like, yeah, that's why we have rules, and I'm like, no, fuck you and your rules.
Yeah, I mean, in Germany, most people would defend this sort of thing. It's like if you repeatedly don't send your children to school, the police will actually show up in your doorstep and demand to know what's up.
Yeah,
And you
but
better have a good excuse.
yeah, but this wasn't the case. I mean, in this particular case on which the Supreme Court ruled, it wasn't the case at all. I mean, even by their own rules. Sorry?
What was not the case?
It wasn't the case that this parent wasn't sending his kid to the school regularly. It was quite the opposite. I mean, it says here that the daughter had a good overall school attendance record of over 90%. So it was, even by their own rules, this is a radical interpretation.
Yeah, but over 90% means that it's an absence rate of almost 10%, which, at least in Germany, people would consider it's unacceptably high, unless you have some sort of serious medical condition or something.
I see. Yeah, well, this is another reason why I'll never live in Germany. And definitely not raise children in Germany. Holy shit. Yeah, all right. Let's go to the next one. Oh, do we even have a good news in this news section? No,
I don't know. I don't think so.
all right.
Okay, coming from the Telegraph from the UK, men won't volunteer to help the Scouts for one depressing reason. They'll be labeled pedophiles. Ever since it was officially recognized by Royal Charter in 1912, the Scout Association has taught British kids the type of campfire practicality and social do-gooding that is arguably lacking in our tech-rich, late capitalist world. All that is in danger, however, as the organization is having to turn away young applicants due to a lack of adult volunteers willing to teach them life skills such as how to tie knots, launch watercraft, and work together to achieve a goal. According to Bear Grylls, chief scout, the waiting list is now upwards of 51,000 young people. It was 35,000 this time last year, with an extra 17,000 volunteers needed to cope with the demand. Volunteering changes us all for the better, said the adventurer and broadcaster, who is personally responsible for at least some of the upturn in applicants for the Scouts. Please join me. Sadly, the truth is that volunteers aren't stepping up for good reason. The first barrier is red tape in the form of an exhaustive compulsory background check overseen by the Disclosure and Barring Service. This was supposed to be less bureaucratic than the Criminal Records Bureau it replaced in 2012, as it only targets quote-unquote sensitive posts with intensive contact with young people. Scouts volunteers are on that list and with some justification. In 2015, lawyer Oliver Jeffcott claimed that his firm received calls relating to over 150 historical cases of child abuse after BBC News covered the story of one of their clients. At the time, the Scouts' figures suggested that 48 abuse claims had been made against the organization since its formation in 1907. The second barrier is a more general red flag. The very real fear among many men who want to work with children that they will be branded a potential pedophile. And this leads into a third factor. Since 2007, it has been compulsory for girls to be admitted to the UK Scouts, no reciprocal agreements allow boys into the brownies or girl guides. This drive to encourage cross-gender participation was a huge success. There are 83,363 female members aged between 6 and 25, but it's possible that this boom has exacerbated the shortage of adult male volunteers willing to come forward. A similar negative dynamic is at play in our schools. Surveys show that there is a woeful shortage of male school teachers, especially at primary level, at a time when every education expert worth their salt admits that schools are crying out for positive male role models. The General Teaching Council for England statistics show that only 26,208 men were working as primary school teachers compared to 185,023 women. A quarter of primary schools have no male teachers at all. Worse, in 2016, there were just 48 male teachers in state nurseries, and only 3 are under the age of 25. Why? In an echo of the Scouts' predicament, former Education Secretary Michael Gove previously admitted that rules around adult men and children made normal contact a legal minefield. A male pal of mine, who would have been an amazing school teacher, summed it up. It's not worth the risk. One accusation from a kid, teen, or mother you pissed off, and your career is over. Due to systematic failings that meant vile pedophile Jimmy Savile escaped justice, there's now a foreboding sense that every decent, ordinary man must be scrutinized as if they are capable of the actions of the very worst. So this we cannot recruit scout helpers nor teachers. Next up, Santa Claus. Young kids sitting on their knee as you give them gifts looks a bit pervy, doesn't it? To our shame, we have allowed male scout leaders, teachers, and any men working with children to become nudge nudge wink wink figures of suspicion and ridicule. Part of the blame must reside with a toxic feminist politically driven whispering campaign that all men are potential rapists. Modern masculinity has been put in the dock, and that appears to remain. Today, we have 51,000 wannabe Boy Scouts who are sitting on their iPads because we cannot recruit enough men to help them gain priceless life skills. In schools, boys are now outperformed by girls at all levels of education, especially poor white working class boys who seem doomed to a life of servile jobs nobody else wants. It is a bitter irony indeed that in the Boy Scouts, where youngsters are taught to start fires, an attitude of no smoke without fire around the male-child interface is preventing them from even learning the practical skills in the first place. Most tragically, by treating much-needed male mentors like monsters in waiting, we are damaging the education and life skills of an entire generation of innocent young men and boys.
Well, we were just discussing about this in the last episode, didn't we? Now we have some data to back that up.
Yeah, very much.
Maybe the author was listening to our episode and decided to do a write-up on it.
Probably that's what happened.
It wouldn't be entirely unreasonable, although it's very unlikely that that indeed happened. But nevertheless, and I will have again to emphasize that this is probably far worse in England than it is in most of continental Europe. I mean, at the end of the day, such things still don't exist. Let's say in Italy or in Austria or in Hungary or in Romania or in Poland, these things haven't yet reached southern and Eastern Europe, and even southwestern Europe. In Spain, either it's not really that bad. It's nevertheless this never-ending cycle of pedo hysteria that once in several years it just keeps coming up, and it comes up a lot more often in Northern Europe than anywhere else.
Yeah, and it's another of these sacred values that we have to protect the children. And yes, it's true we have to protect the children, but we also have to look at the costs of doing that. And if protecting the children means that they can't participate in activities like the Boy Scouts, and that we have to keep them from going out alone and playing because that might lead them to be picked up by a pedophile. We have to protect them from everything. And they're going to grow up stunted, and that's going to be, on average, much more harmful than the occasional child that is sexually molested or raped by a pedophile. Yes, it's really, really awful for that particular child, but you have to look at the trade-offs here. And it's not the case that even one case is too much, um, because if you because it's impossible to be perfectly safe. There's some level of risk you have to be willing to accept, um, if you don't want to lock up your children and doom them to a very boring and um, very unpleasant life.
Yeah, life is a sexually transmitted, extremely deadly disease. The entire purpose of life is just negotiating risks. And, zero tolerance type of policies on anything, really. They just never work out. I mean, imagine if you'd live in a society with a zero tolerance a policy on murder. Now, of course, murder is wrong, but then imagine if you would have to take that to its extreme, into a zero tolerance policy in which one case is too many. Now, what do the policy implications of that would mean you basically have to place everyone under surveillance just to be sure that you can catch any single instance before it happens, basically.
Yeah, basically
Uh,
just put everyone in a padded cell and lock them up.
but even then, you still can't entirely prevent suicide. There are still creative methods. But I guess it's not murder, so yeah, that would
Yeah.
definitely solve it.
Then we just need to have like perfect surveillance so all the guards can surveil each other to prevent them from murdering each other or the people locked up, and then we have the perfect system.
Yeah, yeah. It is now, of course, we're doing here what Milton Friedman usually advises us to do, to take it to the extreme. But nevertheless, in the case of this stranger danger and pedo hysteria, things have already been taken, at least in some English speaking countries. Things have already been taken to this much extreme. And the same is true in Norway. Again, what was I forget the name of the kindergarten, but where they had to put peephole cameras, so just to make sure that everyone is surveilled at any moment, so no allegation of abuse can ever be levied without proper evidence. Uh, these kinds of things are just absurd, and I don't know. I mean, and this is not the first time we've seen this. And to their credit, the Telegraph, once in every 6 or 7 months, they do cover this thing. It was also the Telegraph a year and a half ago, something like that, where they covered some truck driver who said that if I see a child drowning, I'll just keep on driving. and I and he was like, yeah, I know that sounds horrible, but to me it sounds a lot more horrible to go to jail on a false pedophilia charge. Sorry. And it sounds horrible when you put it this way, but at the end of the day, many individuals and many men will say, no, at the end of the day, I matter a lot more than your kid. Fuck you and your kid. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yeah, and you might say that's immoral, and we should be against that. And I agree, but still, you have to look at the incentives you create. And if you give people a very strong disincentive to um, be around other people's children, even if it is necessary to save their lives, then some people are going to look away when they see a child drowning. That's
Mhm.
just going to happen, and that's just one of
Yes.
the costs you have to weigh in how safe from pedophilia do you want to be.
Yeah, it's basically this is the thing that our liberal friends will never understand. 100% of people work on incentives, all of them. Even sociopaths, even schizophrenics work on incentives. Everyone works on incentives. And when you create a system of incentives and disincentives, although apparently disincentive is not actually a real real word in English for some
It is
reason.
now.
It is now okay. Because we decided to. That seems legit.
That's how any word becomes a new word. It's just people use it. It's
Yeah,
not like
fair enough.
there's an official grant you have to fill out to for the English language authority to make a new word. You just
Thank
do it.
goodness. Thank goodness we're not holding this podcast in Swedish, because we could be fined if we're using unauthorized words. Well, not really fined, but reprimanded, officially reprimanded. There's actually an academy that can fuck around with you because you used the word incorrectly. Anyway, back to back to our topic. Yeah, when you create a system of incentives and disincentives like this one, uh, at, there is a moment when the costs just become too high, and a significant minority, or perhaps even a majority, of the individuals targeted by those disincentives will say, "Yeah, you know what, fuck off." And it appears to be. I mean, if this is true, only 14 teachers in 48, sorry, in state nurseries. I mean, that tells me that it is a quite a significant minority, um, who just said, "Yeah, you know what, fuck that shit." No, because
Yeah, I mean,
no.
48 in all of the UK. That's insane.
Yeah, and only three under the age of 25, which means most of them are older than
Well, it's
40, and they'll soon
sorry, it's
retire
just
and
England,
would.
so but that's still 48 in all of England is still very, very few.
Yeah, so yeah, but that means that if this trend continues, there will be zero in just 10 years if nothing at all changes. Because sooner or later, one by one, they will retire, and if this is the pace to which young men join, uh, there will always be just a token one or two over the entire country, in a country of 60 something million people. That's very small.
Yeah,
And when you reach to this level of low, that's probably no longer a significant minority, but probably a majority. And, the quote, which I don't know whether it's real or not, but it sounds very real to me, of the pal of this author, who says, "Well, it's not worth the risk. One accusation and your career is over." That's true. And when that rings true, regardless of whether you accurately quote the source or not, in this case not, uh, that's a question that everyone should ask themselves. Yet nobody does.
yeah, and I mean it's not like we need there to be some sort of parity between the male and female
No, absolutely not.
childcare workers, but if if it's just three under the age of 25 in all of England, then that basically guarantees you that something is going on. That it's not just people expressing their preferences against working as childcare workers. There's obviously got to be at least like a couple of hundred men in England who would want to work in that kind of job, but they just don't because of these kinds of disincentives.
Yes, and some of these disincentives aren't even just social; they're outright written in policy. Now, of course, here and there, sometimes people like us sue one or two institutions and force them to change them from explicit policies to implicit policies. But nevertheless, these kinds of things are systemic, as the feminists like to use the word, except they use it wrongly. But these kinds of things some of them are actually systemic, not just implicit biases and whatnot. Bias, it's not something that you can accurately measure, but um, actual policies and actual trends. Uh, those are things that you can actually measure, and they're there for everyone to see.
Yep.
Yeah, and again, this kind of thing, you correctly said, it's not like we want a 50% parity, and that's probably never going to happen. There was a time when 85% of teachers were male. There's a time when 85% of teachers are female, and probably that thing will turn around again sometime in the future. The 50% thingy, that's just unreasonable. But at the end of the day, when you have such a lopsided statistic resulted exclusively from systemic practices, that's bound to impute some costs upon the wider society. Because when you have an entire generation or entire generations of boys that have not seen a male role model at all, from the moment they're born, from until they're like 15 or something, when they meet some male math teacher or something, which is quite often the case. Again, I'll refer back to Erin Pizzey, who said that, mentions the entire neighborhoods in England where that are routinely labeled man deserts, where there's literally no man there. There's only single mothers with very small children. And you take those kids to some of these kindergartens where they have zero men, and then they go to primary school for primary schools where maybe they have one or two guys, maybe not. Most often, more often than not, they don't. And then only when they reach like fifth or sixth grade, they finally meet a teacher that is not a woman. These kinds of things tend to have consequences, not overnight. It takes very long period of time until the consequences become apparent, but the consequences are still there. And I will say something else which is very horrible for me to say, but I'll say it anyway. um, Sorry, hold on a second. This here, yeah, some volunteers are on that list with some justification. In 2015, lawyer whatever calls relating to over 150 historical cases, blah blah blah. The Scouts figure says that 48 abuse claims have been made against the organization. Okay, let's add them up. 150 plus 48, that's 198 cases in 110 years. I'm sorry, that amounts to zero, statistically speaking. Even if we assume that all 198 of them are true, even if we assume that, that's still zero. Even if we take that it's 10 times more, let's go with that, 1,900, that's still zero. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
considering that this organization had years when they had enrolled in their programs something like 600,000 kids in 1 year. Now, of course, there are fewer now. Then there are not really that many of them. There may be like 200 something thousands per year, but still, it's tens of millions of children have been through this organization's programs in 110 years. Uh, 198 allegations. God knows how many of them are true. Really, that's nothing.
yeah, I mean, that's, I think you're always going to get some amount of abuse.
Yeah.
Whenever you're dealing with children, even if you're just children at home with their parents, parents also sometimes abuse children.
Yeah, some
Teachers
parents
abuse
are
children.
abused.
Priests abuse children. Kindergarten teachers abuse children. Childcare workers abuse children.
Yep.
It's just going to happen.
It's the law of big numbers.
It's impossible to prevent it altogether. If there's some place where there's like an unusually high level of child abuse, then you have to look in if there's some sort of systematic problem there.
Mhm.
But if it's just a very low number of cases, then still, of course, I still have to look for these cases on an individual basis. You have to have some sort of screening process, maybe to assure that you're not employing or you don't have volunteers who are pedophiles or who have abused children, or who are likely to abuse children. But it does not seem to be a systematic problem with the Scouts.
Yeah,
it just seems to be a problem of some particular cases, which you don't get in any organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, of course, the individual cases ought to be prosecuted and whatnot, and of course, if anyone is found guilty, that person should be buried under the jail, of course. But changing entire policies for one case or two cases, or even 100 cases in 110 years, sorry, that's just not how things should be run. And again, it just seems to me, I don't know if it's necessarily the bias of this particular author, or it is indeed a general phenomenon, but it just seems that the Jimmy Savile case just lit up again the pedo hysteria in the United Kingdom. That's how it looks to me.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have cases where these pedophiles are in some way protected by the organization, or the organization is not willing to prosecute them or turn them over to the authorities, as happened in some cases with the Catholic Church, for example. That is, of course, something that we should very harshly criticize, and should definitely look into changing these policies that lead to these kinds of results. But I mean, even in the case of the Catholic Church, it's not that they had some sort of extremely high rate of child abuse. It's just that the problem was specifically that they protected priests who had abused children, and tried to get it from spreading to the public, and because it might damage the reputation of the church.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, a very big problem, and that doesn't seem to be the case with this scout organization. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe some things should be said about the portion where it says that it's been compulsory for girls to be admitted into the UK Scouts, which I think it's a mistake. But then no reciprocal agreements allow boys to join into their equivalent of Girl Scouts. And it says this author that this cross-gender participation was a success. I don't think it was. And he says, but it's possible that the boom has exacerbated the shortage of adult male volunteers willing to come forward. I don't think it's possible. I think it's likely. I just do. Because, think about it this way. You're, let's say, 24, and you want to volunteer. Would you rather volunteer with to teach? You want to volunteer to teach adolescents, for instance, to survive in the woods. Would you volunteer to teach 14-year-old boys or 14-year-old girls? I know my preference.
Yeah, and if anything, we're even more protective of girls in terms of protecting them from pedophiles. It's even a bigger problem there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would definitely volunteer to do such things with boys, but not with girls, because I was a 14-year-old boy, and I can definitely assess slightly better, when there is a minor, for instance, to make the difference between a minor physical injury and a serious physical injury. Whereas with girls, you can sometimes get it wrong. It's much harder to get it wrong with members of your own sex. And all these organizations, the Brownies, the Boy Scouts, and whatnot, they had a purpose, and they were right from the get-go conceived to be respective of sex differences. Whereas now we're in this warped period when we're supposed to believe that there are no sex differences.
Yeah, it's just this sort of general tendency that sort of politically correct society nowadays does not want there to be any sort of exclusively male spaces. Any sort of boys' club is automatically assumed to be sexist.
Well, it is. So what? I mean, even if it is, so what? Uh, to make things worse, this kind of belief is not exactly new. Although it is a specifically feminist belief, it's been seeping into all sorts of quote unquote thought. I mean, I've seen a very similar. Yeah, very similar thought pattern expressed by a quote-unquote traditionalist over at the Federalist. I criticized that article in a video of mine called "The Next Narrative on Sexual Politics." It was the same thing. Well, whenever young men lurk into a corner, whether it's in your suburb or on anonymous image boards, society should, without societal oversight, we should be concerned. And I'm like, yeah, no, why? No, you shouldn't. You should mind your own business. And this particular train of thought is remarkably popular on many, not all, but a significant chunk of the political spectrum. There's just too many people who actually believe this kind of crap now.
And I mean, there's something to be said for oversight and for surveillance and so on. It does probably reduce the amount of wrongdoing that people get up to, but there's also a cost there. The privacy is very important good. It's very valuable in and of itself, and as with everything, it's a matter of trade-offs. We want there to be some sort of oversight. We wouldn't want to have a society where anyone can do anything without anyone else knowing. But we also don't want to live in a panopticon We don't want to be under surveillance all the time. It is very important to have areas where you can retreat to, where there's no one who can watch you, there's no one who is following what you're doing, where you can be on your own for at least a while.
Yep. Yep. All right, let's go to the next one. The next one is needlessly sensationalized because it's a true story, but it's not exactly as true as I'll be reading it. Coming from the Daily Mail, Chechnya opens world's first concentration camp for homosexuals since Hitler's in the 1930s, where campaigners say gay men are being tortured with electric shocks and beaten to death. Not exactly. Chechnya has opened the first concentration camp for homosexuals since Hitler, where campaigners say gay men are being tortured. It comes after it was claimed 100 gay men had been detained and 3 killed in Chechnya last week. A report by Novaya Gazeta said authorities had set up several camps where homosexuals are killed or forced to promise to leave the republic. One of the camps is reportedly at the former military headquarters in the town of Argun. Svetlana Zakharova from the Russian LGBT network told Mail Online, quote, "Gay people have been detained and rounded up, and we're working to evacuate people from the camps, and some have now left the region. Those who have escaped said that they are detained in the same room, and people are kept altogether around 30 or 40. They are tortured with electric currents and heavily beaten, sometimes to death." It sounds like Google Translate to me. One of those who escaped told Novaya Gazeta that prisoners were beaten to force them to reveal other members of the gay community. Another prisoner who fled said that before being incarcerated in one of the camps, he had been forced to pay bribes to the Chechen police of thousands of rubles every month in order to survive. I can definitely believe that portion. Now the regime had taken another step against gays by creating these camps, the survivor said. Alexander Artemiev from Amnesty International in Russia told the Mail Online, quote, "We can only call on the Russian authorities to investigate these allegations. Homosexuals in Chechnya are treated very harshly and prosecuted daily, and they are afraid to talk about it. They either have to hide or leave the republic. We are keeping in touch with the LGBT network that helps people in Russia to find shelter. The problem is people there cannot talk about it, as it puts their lives and those they speak to in danger. This is the main issue we're facing in Russia and the main challenge." Ekaterina Sokiryanskaya, Russia project director for the International Crisis Group, told Mail Online, "The story is very much developing. Victims are escaping." Tonia Lokhshina from Human Rights Watch in Moscow said, "For several weeks now, a brutal campaign against LGBT people have been sweeping through Chechnya. These days, very few people in Chechnya dare to speak to human rights monitors or journalists, even anonymously, because the climate of fear is overwhelming and people have been largely intimidated into silence." Well, actually, this has been true for decades, probably even more than 100 years. But anyway, filing an official complaint against local security officials is extremely dangerous, as retaliation by local authorities is practically inevitable. It is difficult to overstate just how vulnerable LGBT people are in Chechnya, where homophobia is intense and rampant. LGBT people are in danger not only of persecution by the authorities, but also of falling victim to honor killings by their own relatives for tarnishing the family honor. That's true. Last week, Novaya Gazeta said Chechen police had rounded up more than 100 men suspected of being gay and killed 3. Maybe. It claimed that among those detained were well-known local television personalities and religious figures. That's actually bollocks. President Razman Kadyrov, actually it's Ramzan Kadyrov, who is a key ally of Vladimir Putin, allegedly ordered the clampdown, although officially his regime denied the arrest, claiming it is impossible to prosecute those who are not in the republic. Kadyrov, who introduced Islamic rule in the Muslim-majority region, has been accused of earlier human rights violation. He described the allegations as absolute lies and disinformation. Kadyrov's spokesman, Ali Karimov, told the Interfax news agency, quote, "You cannot arrest or repress people who just don't exist in the republic. If such people existed in Chechnya, law enforcement would not have to worry about them, as their own relatives would have sent them to where they could never return." Chechen society is strictly conservative, meaning that unlike other cases where relatives or rights activists may put pressure on authorities when a homosexual relative disappears, those suspected are likely to be disowned by their own family. According to the New York Times, a former newspaper, gay men on the region have been deleting their social media profiles after it was reported authorities tried to lure gay men into dates and arrested them. The reports from Russia claim those arrested range from 15 to 50. All right. Some clarification is needed. Yes, it's true. Chechnya is an Islamic no-go country within Russia. So much for Putin being the defender of Christianity, by the way. Also, it is true that in Chechnya, if you're non-straight, you can indeed be killed or at the very least very harshly persecuted by your own family, and that's considered normal in Chechnya. And if you want to seek help from law enforcement, forget about it. That's not going to happen. So yeah, all of that is true. However, with regards to this story, neither the anti-gay nor the pro-gay press in Russia has been able to prove the existence of this camp anywhere. I mean, the Argun story. Well, I went to the social media of that particular. Well, it's a city actually. It's not a town. Uh, you can actually look through the live webcams in various places in the town, and you can actually ask people in real time, which I did. No one has been able to prove the existence of it. Now, it could still be true, but there is no evidence for it. That's one aspect. The second aspect, the first article published by Novaya Gazeta is from April the 1st, so the story is now 2 weeks old. Why now? It seems that many more quote-unquote respectable outlets are sitting on the story and are not necessarily breaking it because they can't confirm it either, or at least the parts of it are just simply impossible to confirm. I also spent a few hours on the Russian press, and what I learned is that the crackdown was indeed real, but it appears to have been triggered following several NGOs, LGBT NGOs in Russia. They filed for gay pride parade permits in various Chechen cities. For instance, Nikolai Alexeyev, LGBT rights activist, told to gayrussia.ru 3 or 4 days ago that he believes that the crackdown has a lot to do with his own NGO's action to file for permits to hold gay pride parades in several Chechen cities. But he also says that he believes that the Moscovite and international press's claims of a concentration camp are, quote, unfounded facts, unquote. It should be noted that this Alexeyev dude is involved in a European Court of Human Rights trial against the Chechen ban on gay expression. So yeah, make that what you will.
Yeah, so when I suggested the story that these sort of claims of concentration camps and so on, that seemed a bit dubious to me. So that's why I wanted you to look into that sort of stuff. And it's really great that you did. So as one perhaps should suspect, with the Daily Mail, they're taking a real story and exaggerating it and making it more sensationalist, as they usually do.
Well, it's
But
a
I mean,
tabloid at the end of the day,
yeah.
so that's what they
But I
do.
mean, the facts that are actually there are bad enough, and yeah, it's really quite sad that this sort of thing still goes on in this day and age. And yeah, one thing that's definitely worth pointing out, even though we've talked about that many times before, is that it's all about gay men.
Yeah.
Lesbian women, no one cares really. It's not that it's encouraged or that it's looked upon favorably, but people for the most part don't really care.
Yeah, I've been following the developments on Chechnya because I actually do study Islamic dictatorship, and make no mistake, Chechnya is a hereditary, personal Islamic Sharia dictated, Sharia influenced dictatorship. That's what Chechnya is. Basically, at the end of the Second Chechen War, Putin made an agreement with the Kadyrov family and said, "Look, I'm gonna let you guys do whatever the fuck you want there, as long as whatever the fuck you're doing there doesn't spill over outside the borders of the Chechenskaya Republic." That's that's the agreement. So the Kremlin is perfectly aware of these kinds of abuses happening, and now the Kremlin is definitely not very gay tolerant, but at the very least, if you would have honor killings or things like that in any other area of Russia, they would actually prosecute it. but they'll do exactly nothing in this case, because this is an Islamic dictatorship that exists inside Russia with the explicit agreement of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin in general. So I've been studying the developments in Chechnya for at least 2 years now, and every single time you see one of these things, it's almost always gay men, and when it's not gay men, is trannies. That is men who believe they're women, but at the end of the day, still men. So it's never. I have yet to find any case in Chechnya that doesn't involve a man. It just doesn't. It appears that it doesn't happen. Maybe it did happen once or twice in the last 20 years since the Chechen Republic has been on the map, but I haven't been able to find it.
Yeah, and this is sort of thing that pisses me off about intersectional feminism. Because here you actually have a problem of intersectionality. It's that the problem of prosecution, specifically if you're a man and you're gay. If this specific combination, you are very viciously persecuted. But from the intersectional feminists, we don't hear anything about that. Why? Because it doesn't fit into the model of this unilateral oppression model, where there's an oppressor group that's men and an oppressed group that's women. There's an oppressor group that's straight people, oppressed people that's gay people. But it doesn't fit into the model, because on the other hand, you have once that you have this oppressor group men and this oppressed group gay men or gays. Yeah, when you combine the two, you actually get more oppression than if you combine the two oppressed groups. If you combine the gay and woman, it's still not treated particularly well. Still looked down upon, but they're not tortured, they're not killed. It just doesn't fit into the model, and so they never talk about it. I mean, this is not the only example. Like take for example, say race in the United States in particular, and sex. If you look at things like violent crime victimization, or look at people being killed by the police, or look at sentencing disparities in case of committing a crime. If you're a man, you get longer sentences than if you're a woman, and you're more likely to be killed by a police officer, and so on. And also, you're also worse off if you're black compared to being white. Now, to what extent is this due to sexist or racist discrimination is an open question, a difficult question to answer. But just looking at it through this intersectional feminist lens, that inequality is very strong evidence of bigotry and discrimination. You would have to assume or to conclude from this intersectional feminist lens that once again, being a man and being black is the worst combination, because it's actually sex that plays a larger role than race here. Because if you're a black woman compared to a white man, the black woman on average will actually get a lower sentence, and she's less likely to be killed by a police officer, and she's less likely to become the victim of violent crime.
Now that you opened the intersectional topic, I would like to remind you that Chechnya is a Muslim dictatorship, and as we know, Muslims are on the now on the top of the hierarchy oppression Olympics structure. So whenever Muslims do anything bad, from a progressive standpoint or from an intersectional standpoint, we're supposed to shut the fuck up, because otherwise it's Islamophobia, and that's really bad.
Yeah, I mean, the solution seems to be that people on the left still sort of complain about, they complain about, and they They demand something be done about these human rights violations, but they just sort of keep quiet about the fact that this is an Islamic state.
Yeah,
That's a fact that maybe they're sort of aware, but it's just something that they really downplay.
yeah, it is an Islamic state, and more to the point, these kinds of abuses are in a to a very large extent religiously motivated and Islamically motivated. Because again, homophobia may be rampant in Russia, but at the end of the day, families disowning their gay members and honor killings. The straight cousin killing the gay cousin just to make sure that the family isn't dishonored and things like that. That just doesn't happen outside the Chechen Republic anywhere else in Russia. It just doesn't happen. Sure, you can be randomly beaten if you're if you're openly a fag in some small towns of Russia, anywhere else in Russia, but honor killings, that just never happens. And also this kind of massive clampdown to arrest several dozens of gay men just because potato, just that doesn't happen in anywhere else in Russia either. So you have a very militant homophobic community inside of a admittedly very homophobic country in general. But nevertheless, their homophobes are a lot worse than the non-Muslim homophobes. So
Yep.
it is the religious component is absolutely relevant to the story, but apparently that's racist to talk about it, or it's Islamophobic, or it's both. Usually both, because for some reason Islam is a race these days.
Yeah, and it's once again, it's something that you would expect intersectional feminists to cover if they were being intellectually honest.
You're being unreasonable now.
Yep.
I mean, come on. Intellectual honesty on intersectional feminists.
Yeah, that's probably also a patriarchal construct, not just logic and science, but
Absolutely.
also honesty.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely, it's a concept first described by dead white men, and we all know that dead white men owned slaves, and therefore they're wrong.
Yep.
Even if
Perfect
they
logic.
didn't.
Sorry,
Yeah.
not logic, but perfect feminine intuition.
Yep. There you go. There you go. But yeah, in all seriousness, the developments in Chechnya don't really surprise me. I mean, as cynical as it may sound, when I first read the story, I'm like, yeah, probably half of it is bullshit, but yeah, probably the other half is very true, and it's not really surprising. I mean, these kinds of things have been occurring in that particular area of Russia long before the Chechen wars, long before. I mean, think about it this way: Lenin was quote unquote, well, actually not quote unquote. Lenin was the progressive of his days. Um, Lenin was the first that said, "Yeah, whatever, let the fags do whatever they want." That applied in areas that were Muslim majority. In the what we now call Turkmenistan, or in northern of what we now call Azerbaijan, and of course in the current territory of the Chechenskaya Republic. These kinds of, Lenin's words weren't particularly well received in those areas. And the second Lenin died, and they were allowed to make their own laws, the anti-gay laws came just back on the books, and the prosecutions came back again, and everyone thought about it as normal. I mean, these kinds of things are very, very old. These kinds of things have been going on long before the Human Rights Watch, or the Crisis Group, or whatever, these kinds of Amnesty International, and all sorts of these organizations that are lately just part of the leftist media complex, or the leftist NGO complex. Long before any of these guys were around, these kinds of things were happening there, even long after the rest of Europe had moved on, basically.
Yep.
So yeah, all right. Let's go to the next one,
On the
which
topic of
is,
moving on,
yeah, on the top and on the topic of
guess,
Islam.
yeah, if we're staying in the topic of Islam, from derbund.ch, a Swiss source, quote, Muslim mothers bring their sons up to be losers. In her bestseller, The Veiled Danger, Sana Ramadani writes about macho men, the female caretakers and educators who spoil them, and the West's integration mania. And it's an interview. So the interviewer says, in your book, you challenge everyone. Politicians, especially the left, feminists, writers of art sections, conservative Islam, Muslim machos, and their mothers. Do you require police protection? It's harder to get that than you might think. I've submitted countless police reports, but because the threats, especially on social media, are almost always anonymous, the police can't do much. This is why I've requested a firearms permit last year. Whose reaction has been most vigorous? That of the gender feminists. They call me uneducated, an isolated case, and they relativize. Conservative Muslims, on the other hand, don't criticize. They just threaten. Yeah, skipping a bit here. Is it seen as particularly bad that you, as a Muslim, are criticizing Islam? If I were German, they'd call me a Nazi whore and a racist, that being the go-to accusation. Me being a Muslim makes things more difficult and therefore worse. That I, as a woman, am expressing criticism is the worst thing imaginable. And so they can just call me deranged and traumatized. But they're also more afraid of me because I know quite well what I'm talking about. My opponents avoid sitting across from me in a talk show whenever they can. What is your problem with feminists? You were once a member of Femen, after all. I'm only opposed to a very particular breed of feminists. Those who talk about women's solidarity but don't live it. Who think the only evil is Western white man, who may be freely criticized, while criticism of members of a foreign culture, that's just as misogynist, is automatically labeled racist. Feminism is about human rights. You're allowed to criticize anything and everyone who violates women's rights, including Muslims. If feminists want to label me a racist for that, then I take issue with their conception of feminism. Is that why you left Femen? That's one of the reasons. Femen has attracted more and more gender feminists like that. Things went so far that they wanted to protest against FIFA by burning a German flag on the Holocaust Memorial, and because of Pegida in Dresden, one activist wrote, "Bomber Harris, do it again," on her breasts. That's unacceptable. Some explanation here. Pegida is an organization called Patriotische Europäer gegen die Islamisierung des Abendlandes, the patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the West, which is sort of a right-wing protest group in Germany, which sort of runs the gamut from ordinary people who are worried about Islamic Islamic immigration to outright neo-Nazis. So it's not. I don't have a problem with them criticizing Pegida, but this slogan "Bomber Harris, do it again" that refers to a sort of I think British military commander who was responsible for the bombing raid on Dresden in World War II, which killed, I think there was something like 25,000 civilians. So yeah, that is indeed unacceptable. And there's also this slogan has sort of become popular within certain parts of the Antifa movement because nothing signalizes your opposition to fascism, just like being in favor of tens of thousands of civilians being killed for no good military objective. But yeah, so continuing with this piece. Your family fled from Macedonia to Germany when you were 7. While your progressive father began a new life, your mother clamped down. Why? I was very lucky that my father was educated. He hailed from a liberal family in which no woman wore a headscarf. When we arrived in Germany, he avoided contact with other Albanians. Instead, he participated actively in communal life in our village, learned German right away, and always told us how important the language was and that we had to apply ourselves. And your mother? She didn't manage these connections. Every week she spent several hours on the phone with her family back home and so remained in her old world. The values and morals of our old home, which my father had never liked and against whose suffocating narrowness he had always struggled, became more and more important to my mother. Germans being seen as infidels and German women as sluts. As I grew older, she had an increasingly strong inclination to control me. Because I might soil the family honor, and then no Albanian man would want to marry me. And then it would be all her fault. So give me a couple of paragraphs here. You painted a very negative picture of Muslim mothers. You write of a deeply pernicious cult of the sun. Because boys are raised to be princes. They are coddled, spoiled, and waited on, which effectively raises them to be losers. They fail because the West is a meritocracy, and what they're taught at home does not fit in with that. They're not used to things being demanded of them, of having to apply themselves, and so they fail. And the blame is put on everyone else. The teacher, that infidel slut who dares make demands of the son, or Western people in general, who are a bunch of racists who do not allow Muslims any opportunities. You write that you avoid certain parts of Berlin, such as Neukölln. You say you are seen as a prey there. Isn't that an exaggeration? No. In Neukölln, Wedding, and Kreuzberg, there are streets where you can't go as a woman, especially not in summer. It's like running the gauntlet. You're constantly harassed. Recently, I parked my car in Neukölln, and a young Muslim shouted at me, "Get lost, whore! I want that parking space." Well, I want that parking space. The only time I felt safe there was last year when I was wearing a hijab for a report I was doing. For the first time, the men didn't pay me any heed. How can it be that the only way I as a woman am treated with respect in a German city is if I'm wailed? And then it goes on after that, but that's all I'm going to read from here. It's a really interesting interview, but it's so long.
She has a point with the Neukölln, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, she does. It's not an exaggeration for sure. On the other hand, I'd like to read an English translation of her book because I'm pretty sure I'll find lots and lots of things to criticize there. For starters, she I don't know if it's necessarily intentional. Maybe the book is more clear than this interview, but she seems to be conflating everyone who speaks Albanian is Albanian, which is not exactly true. It's a little bit more complicated than that. You know, it's almost like everyone who speaks German is German, which is not exactly true. It's pretty much the same thing. She comes from Macedonia, she says. Yeah, well, the Albanians from Macedonia are a little bit different and far more tolerable than the Albanians from Kosovo, but worse than the Albanians from Albania. So you know, these kinds of nuances I'm sure she's aware of, but she chooses to ignore. Also, the Muslim experience of Albanians is not really that representative. That's true. That's actually true. For starters, because mathematics. I mean, there are like what 10 million Albanians worldwide, maybe 11. Yeah, compared to how many Arabs, how many compared to how many Arabs, how many Turks, yeah, that's a bit different. So there's that. But other than that, yeah, she's at the very least she's willing to talk about it, which is not really that often. And if Albanians can lead the reform within Islam, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's an interview I found really, really interesting and really refreshing. Even coming from a feminist like her, I mean, she still has, of course, all these feminist beliefs. That's fine. That's things I would disagree with her about, but at least she seems to be somewhat intellectually honest. She actually, realizes the problems with lots of feminists excluding Islam from criticism, which is just like absurd. Like from a feminist perspective, it just makes no sense because if you actually look at if you want to find sexist attitudes, you will find far more of that in Muslims than in Christians in the Western world. It's just a fact.
Yeah, and not just far more, but also far more egregious. I mean, the exact same attitude will be significantly more tame, even amongst very militant conservative Christians, when compared even with "quote unquote" moderate Muslims.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very least, the hardline conservative Christians, they're like, yeah, maybe gays should get back into the closet. Whereas the very moderate Muslim in Britain, for example, say, yeah, that wouldn't be such a bad idea if they would be thrown off the rooftops. Yeah, that would be fantastic. So I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, and it is true. I know this is going to trigger some people, which is great. I want to trigger you all. But it is nonetheless true. The difference between many radical Muslims and moderate Muslims is that the radical Muslims actually do what they say, whereas the moderate Muslims just hope that the radicals will do what they say. I mean, that's pretty much the case. That's why I wanted to take exception with this interview, because she's actually trying to say that this is true in every single case, which is not, or even in a significant minority of the cases, which again it's not true. Albanian Muslims are just very different breed of Muslims. They just are. Uh, and you can see that very easily, but by just comparing anything, basically, honor killings or any kind of that. See how many of those you'll be able to find in Albania versus in Turkey, or versus in Pakistan, or they're just not comparable. The whole concept doesn't really exist in Albania. Now, admittedly, they have a different kind of cultural quirks that predate Islam, and those are also very fucked up, but they are not connected to the topic of Islam.
Yeah, I mean, definitely this interview is sort of very generalizing, and I guess it's just because of the format. Even though it's a long interview, it's if you're trying to answer a complex question in 50 or 100 words, you can't include all the nuance, and you have to generalize things.
True. That's why I said I wanted to read an English translation of her book, to see if her book is more nuanced. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's this interview is sort of rife with generalizations, which of course are not going to be true in all cases, but it is definitely sort of a general trend. Of course, it's not going to be true that all or almost all Muslims bring up their sons to be spoiled brats, but that is something they definitely see. It's definitely something that that I have noticed from sort of the Muslims that I know, which is not like a huge number, but there's definitely this idea that especially mothers are sort of like do everything for their sons, and they're so important, and they're basically treated like little princes, and it sort of is a bit similar to how girls are treated in Western culture. That
Yep,
they're these little
that's
princesses,
exactly what
and
I was about to say.
and they're sort of coddled and protected, and by actually especially by their fathers, but also by their mothers to some extent. And it's very harmful in both cases.
Yep.
Because reality does not revolve around your child, and the sooner your child learns that, the better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this kind of overprotection. There is a reason why I have regular arguments with what now we even have a word for it, the helicopter parents. I routinely have arguments with these kinds of people who raise their kids, regardless of the kid's sex. They raise their kids in this very cocooned and coddled model, which eventually leads them to be very stunted adults. And yeah, I guess spoiled brats works as a very good characterization. Um, Now, I suppose that what she is describing kind of hits a nerve with the certain elements of the Muslim community, but you know me, I'm like, yeah, tough luck. Does it hit a nerve? Does it offend you? So what? And thank goodness, I mean, at the very least in Switzerland are not really that PC about it. I mean, if she had published this book in France, she would be now on a charge of hate crimes. uh, so at the very least she lives in a country that is not really that PC about it, at least for the
Yeah,
time being, I guess.
yeah, and Switzerland as well as in Germany, that you're still allowed to criticize Islam, and it's like if like on the political left, maybe that's quite taboo, but sort of in the general intellectual discussion, you're still allowed to criticize Islam. It's um, and I mean that there's maybe like the political correctness has not reached a sort of level that it has in, say, Canada or places like that, where Islam is sort of at the top of the progressive stack. That if you're Muslim, then being Muslim basically trumps any other sort of minority status or oppressed status that you can have. That's not really the case in the German-speaking world, at least not
Yeah,
yet.
well, I don't think anyone in Europe can actually reach Canada level. I mean, Canada just exceeded Sweden. I mean, I used to call Canada the bigger Sweden. Now I'll call it the Sweden because, I mean, at the very least, you don't have social justice tribunals in Sweden, and you'll definitely not be fined for mocking Islam or things like that. Yeah, sure, the press will write hit pieces about you, but at the end of the day, they won't do anything. Really, the state will definitely won't do much to you for writing a book or for writing an article of satire or even a serious article calling Islam cancer or things like that. Yeah, sure, the left will be triggered, and the press, the cathedral media, will write hit pieces on you, but at the end of the day, the state will be like, yeah, whatever. Whereas in Canada now, eh, eh, you might get into one of those human rights tribunals, which in some provinces they're called the social justice tribunals, and you can be severely fined. I mean, Mark Stein knows about it.
Yeah,
Eh,
it's quite sad.
it is. It is. Again, I would really like to. I mean, at least this interview made me curious to want to read her book. Maybe her book is more nuanced. If it's not, at the very least, maybe I'll learn a thing or two. I would really like to read her book. I hope English language translations will be published.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, quite important that she talks about the role that mothers play in all this. As
Yes.
oftentimes, especially on the feminist side, I sort of assume that it's a patriarchal society, therefore women have no power, therefore it's all because of men.
Yeah, that's not exactly true. Yeah, that's true. I don't know if you remember when we had the chap from Iran on our show,
Ali
and
Mirashband.
yeah, Ali, when he told us that for instance, in Iran, and this has been confirmed to me by other people also from Iran and from Pakistan. For instance, the hijab issue is significantly more harshly enforced by other women, not by men. So yeah, there are many kinds of dynamics like these that take place in within various Muslim sub communities that our friends on the left pretend they don't exist, or outright they don't know they exist and they don't want to know.
Yeah, and that's why it's very interesting to think of Islam as being a sort of a patriarchal model of men oppressing women for the benefit of men. That's not what is the case. It's not how patriarchy has ever worked.
Yeah, no, it has its own gynocentric tenets, just like any other. Now, admittedly, nobody can beat the Indians in terms of gynocentrism, but still, Islam is a very good competitor. All right, let's go to the next one. Oh boy, seriously, we don't have good news in this. Okay.
Okay, the next one is from Heat Street. Gender expert. Teens are trying to become transgender because it's trendy. One of Australia's top experts on gender has raised concerns that children and teens are overdiagnosed as transgender. Adolescents are, quote, trying out being transgender to stand out or gain attention from their peers, psychiatrist Stephen Stathis told the Courier Mail last week. One said to me, Dr. Steve, I want to be transgender. It's the new black, he recalled. Stathis, who runs Brisbane's Lady Cilento Children's Hospital, said that gender dysphoria diagnosis will be given to only a tiny minority of the 180 minors who seek treatment at his clinic this year. A gender dysphoria diagnosis is the first step for a transgender person to begin transitioning. Though children under 18 cannot get transgender reassignment surgery in Australia, they can receive hormonal therapy or treatment to suppress puberty. In an interview last month, Stathis said that up to three-fourths of young patients who present with gender variant interests and behaviors or are gender diverse will outgrow their feelings and don't need treatment. You might get a 6 or 7-year-old girl wanting to dress as a boy, he said. She may even say she wants to be a boy. When she hits puberty, she says, no, I'm just a girl who likes to do boy things. Stathis' clinic recently received 1,000 1.117 million federal grant to cut wait times for patients seeking gender-related medical care. Before it prescribes hormone blockers, status requires children and adolescents to undergo intensive mental health screenings with multiple psychiatrists. They also must show they have socially transitioned to their preferred gender for at least 6 months, the Brisbane Times reported.
Fact check, true. Yeah, it is true. When we were saying 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that the whole insanity that was going on Tumblr will have consequences, everyone thought, oh, come on, you're exaggerating. Well, you can thank Tumblr for all of this. Well, Tumblr and associated networks who promoted similar types of narratives. I mean,
Yeah.
at first, that kind of reaction, oh, I want to be a tranny because it's the new black. Where do you think that individual heard that? It definitely wasn't from his or her parents.
Yeah,
It had to come from the internet and from the PC culture. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the thing is, being transgender is not cool. It's not a nice thing to do. Just like transition to another sex. It's not a. It's a very, very serious step. I mean, yes, there are people who genuinely are suffering from gender dysphoria, and in some cases it may be necessary or sensible to have gender reassignment surgery or to transition socially, because gender dysphoria is a very serious like mental condition. But it's not something that should be undertaken lightly or because it's trendy or something like that. There's a huge problem of people with gender dysphoria and transgender people committing suicide and suffering from depression. It's a very, very serious problem. It shouldn't be taken lightly and just say, I want to just transition because it's what all the cool people will do, or because it's going to gain me some social status in some sort of leftist hierarchy of oppression. It's just not a good idea for mental health reasons, for like general sanity reasons.
Yeah, it is. It is, after all, a collection of mental disorders. Now, I'll have to be a little bit more radical than you are, and you know that. I don't agree with anything of this tranny related being anywhere near around children. Sure, adults want to mutilate their body to look like the opposite sex, whatever, mate. Your shekels, I don't care. But with children, no, just no, because no, period. Giving public shekels for this, absolutely no, that's insane. And allowing puberty blockers on minors, no, generally no. But if you really have to, I don't know, tie it with the age of consent or something. I mean, when I see situations like this where they give, it hasn't happened yet in Australia, but it did happen in Canada and in Sweden, where they allowed these kinds of hormone blockers and like things like that to 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. I think that's insane. That's absolutely insane. It should never be allowed. I don't care if you feel like the opposite sex. No.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it's something that in a lot of cases it's something that people just outgrow.
Yeah, most of the time, in overwhelming
yes.
majority of the cases, yes.
And I mean, it's not like you have to conform to all the stereotypes about your particular sex. You can be a tomboy. You can be a sort of more girlish boy, even though the latter is not as socially acceptable, which
Yeah, but it's
might be a
far more
problem.
socially
But
acceptable than mutilation and increased risks
yeah,
of suicide.
yeah,
Just saying.
definitely. That's it's still it's maybe not ideal, but it's a lot better than the alternative. And there's things that have always existed. It's not. We've always talked about things like let's say, rather mannish woman or something like that.
Yeah.
That sort of thing has always been around. Maybe people didn't necessarily approve of that as much as like a more ladylike woman, but it's something that has been accepted. That it's something that there's some variation um, in how typical you are of your sex, or your gender, whatever you want to call it. And then it's just some natural variation. That's something that's always been accepted. It's not some sort of new discovery by 21st century feminists or something like that. It's
Yeah,
always been
absolutely.
around.
Absolutely. And I would go to point out another aspect of this tranny culture. Uh, maybe it wasn't intentional, although I'm not very convinced that it wasn't intentional. But the net result of this particular kind of making trannyism trendy, which should never happen, is an increased intolerance for I don't know how to call it, maybe feminine gay men, something like that. Which is something that again it's not new, as you said, it's not a discovery of the progressive 21st century feminist left, but also the intolerance for feminine gay men is not something new. For instance, it's been acceptable and even religiously approved in Iran since the 80s. In Iran, for instance, the state subsidizes sex change as and the justification is that being a gay man is haram, but transitioning into a woman, that's perfectly acceptable. That's how they justify it in Iran, and it just seems to me that making this thing, making trannyism cool, it kind of breeds the same kind of intolerance, in which perfectly healthy uh, boys who may end up being very happy, slightly feminine gay men would end up being trapped into this cycle of lunacy where they pretend they're women. And I think that's significantly worse than any sort of shortcomings you might have your way because you're a bit more feminine or whatnot.
Yeah, and once again, gender dysphoria is a real thing. But it's a very, very rare condition. It's something that very, very few people suffer from, and even those people who suffer from it, in a lot of cases, they get over it.
Yep.
And the cases where you actually have to transition um, are vanishing, vanishingly small, and um, making some sort of trendy thing is just insane.
It is, and again, I'm not entirely convinced at all. I mean, I've been reading this about this exhaustively since they started hitting on children. From I've learned about this phenomenon as early as I think '97 or something, but I never cared about it. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Who cares? Who gives a crap? But then when they started hitting on children with this, then I started studying on it because then it became relevant enough to me. And I've been reading quite a lot about it, and I'm not entirely convinced at all that there is even one case where quote unquote transition is useful. Because if you look at the suicide rates, it seems that pre-op and post-op doesn't do any difference at all. If anything, it marginally increases the suicide rate. And I don't know if the whole thing with transition, I don't know, the model should be shifted towards something else. And there were some doctors who did try that, and they ended up being fired on a politically motivated crusade against them. There is an article from I think it was the New York Magazine, um, called "How the Fight Against Trans Kids" or something like that. Sorry, "How the Fight for Trans Kids." I really have to find it. How the fight over transgender kids got a leading sex researcher fired. That's the headline of the article. I'm going to drop it in the chat room. And basically, that particular doctor did what I would think it's very sensible in the case, and it's probably the same thing that this guy Stathis is doing in Australia. He basically, when he got minor patients, the first step was to see if they can get them to actually accept their biology rather than insist that they are the opposite sex. And although his method proved to be extremely successful and parents were extremely happy with the results, it wasn't politically correct, because the politically correct dogma these days is to offer what the left calls gender affirming care, which is to say, if a 6-year-old girl comes and tell you, the doctor, that she's a boy, you have to reaffirm that to her, rather than say, no, hold on a second, maybe that's not exactly true.
Yeah, I haven't studied the topic in any depth, so I can't really comment on that. On like what sort of procedures are more effective or better in terms of treatment or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah, I became concerned about it roughly 2 years ago when I saw that headline that Norway allows sex change from the age of 7. That's when I, come on, this is serious, and that's when I said, well, I actually have to study about this thing, because at that time I was like, well, maybe that makes sense, but what if it doesn't? What if we're allowing children's lives to be ruined because we don't want to offend the trannies? And that's when I started studying about it. And the more I study about it, the more I'm less convinced. The less I am convinced that this business with transition has any legitimacy whatsoever. Maybe I'm wrong, but at the very least, I'm trying to ask the questions. But whenever I ask the questions, I get all sorts of hate mail that, oh my God, how dare you? And I'm like, yeah, well, if you ask me how dare I'll ask some more.
yeah, I think asking those kinds of questions definitely very important, because there's this sort of huge red flag over how politicized this topic has become, and
Yeah,
how much of
if you
a
tell me I shouldn't dare to ask the questions, then I'm very interested in your topic. Because if I'm not allowed to ask the questions, then I want to ask all the questions.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, if there's any leftist listening, censorship doesn't work, kids. Just saying. Just saying. All right, let's go to the last one on the order of the day, and if we're lucky, we're gonna be under 2 hours again, even though we started very late. So, coming from SVT, SVT is the state television in Sweden. Husby to be the first to get feminist urban planning. And it goes like this. Women feel stared at and insecure when they walk across the square in Husby Center. In an attempt to break the male dominance in public places in the district, the owner of the center will, for the first time in Sweden, adapt the center using feminist urban planning. Among other things, it will move out a cafe where there are a lot of men. Women have not dared to wear a skirt. They feel that they had eyes on them and felt a discomfort from the subway on. It's a male-dominated space, says Lucian landscape coordinator for the Swedish Housing Authority. Lucian is definitely a Swedish name. No, it's not. Women are afraid and feel discomfort in the Husby Center. It was some of the conclusions that the Swedish Housing Authority got to offer extensive surveys and conversations. Got from after the extensive surveys and conversations with several female tenants. One of those who participated in the dialogue is Husby resident Esme Güller, here, another Turk, who is also active in the women's organization of the Social Democratic Party. She thinks that men act as if they own the center. Oh, so a Turkish Social Democrat partisan hack is also a misandrist feminist in Sweden. That's very shocking. But not all recognize themselves in this picture. Husby resident Habib Lofty, oh, there's another Swede, does not believe that women say they feel scared. In the square near the metro, there is a cafe where guests can drink tea and eat pastries while looking out over the square. It collected a lot of men and outside the cafe in the summer, which has led to many women feeling socially controlled and stared at, according to the Swedish Housing Authority that owns the center. As part of the feminist urban planning, the cafe should now move to another part of the square. On the new site, visitors are now going to get the same view of passing, are not going to get the same view of passing people and replace the cafe. To replace the cafe, there will be a food center and a cultural center to change the atmosphere in the square. The housing authority has also plans to improve the street lighting. This is believed to attract more women and children, but also female traders. The reporter asked, how will women be able to take a larger place in public space by moving a cafe? Answer. There is a structural change that needs to happen, but I think if we arrange safer spaces for women to and from the subway, it will make quite a lot of good to women in their daily lives. That's not an answer, but anyway. The Swedish Housing Authority is also planning to do something about the second part of the square and the metro upturns in collaboration with the SL, which is to Stockholm's local traffic. I don't think that needs translation. But what exactly they will do there is not yet clear. The SVT Stockholm news crew has spoken with the family that owns the cafe, but they do not want to appear on camera. The owners told me that they'd like to see more female visitors, but that male dominance is due to deep-seated structures in the area, and that the move does not solve any of those problems. Quote, no superficial solution such as moving the cafe will solve the problems that characterize the area. It is sad that we are having such a good position today to now get a worse location because of a solution which unfortunately will not affect the mentality of the people here, says one of the owners. Husby resident Esme Güller, here's another Swede, is, however, sympathetic to feminist urban planning. She hopes that the changes will lead to more women entrepreneurs and activities that strengthen women and others in the area, including job search assistance and driver's licenses. In order to accommodate, you have to make changes. It has been done before, and it can be done now. It's just about to get started, she adds. All right. So the reason why I mentioned spotless Swede is because there are no Swedes in Husby, and I'll prove that with my own camera in June. Finding a Swede in Husby is extremely unlikely. It's like finding a Christian in Saudi Arabia. Maybe they exist, but it's very hard to find them.
Okay, just to recap, you've got one group of people that says, hey, look, we're going to segregate the men from the women by moving this predominantly male-used cafe to a more isolated location, so that way the women passing by don't have to shrink underneath the awesome fucking penis-embodied power of the male gaze, right? That's what I'm getting so far.
Yep.
And you've got another group that says, we don't see what the problem here is at all. And then you've got another group that says, look, simply moving this cafe and rearranging a few things isn't going to help, because you still have to contend with the awesome might, the overwhelming fucking power of male privilege given through their stare. These people sound like all these women that are complaining sound like a bunch of fucking pussies.
Now I should probably also tell everyone that Husby is also the place that recently ended up in the international headlines as the place where feminists are running from because of the Muslim violence. So, I'm just saying.
I think it's just violence committed by men who just maybe happen to be Muslims, but let's not talk about that. It's not Muslim violence. Come on.
Yeah, well, it appears that some of the feminists that have moved out or are on the process of moving out from Husby, some of them have had an aha moment when they realized that, hold on a second, I grew up in a male-dominated neighborhood when I was a child, but it was, dominated by Swedish men. And throughout my entire childhood, I've never heard of any kind of violence happening, as in at all. The worst thing that would happen would be that some drunk dude would maybe break up a glass of beer outside the bar because potato. That was the worst thing, and it was in the news, in the local news, because it happened. So and now you have this neighborhood that, well, actually, it's not the only one. There's so many of these kinds of no-go zones in Sweden. Where this kind of thing doesn't even report breaking a glass. Are you kidding me? We have some grapes to cover. So some of them are starting to wake up that maybe it's not men, maybe it's culture, maybe it's something else.
Yeah, I mean it's just putting it on coincidence is just not really plausible. Like with the, I mean, all these sort of stories about Sweden being the rape capital of the world, that's of course not true. It's largely because the definition is very different. But rapes counted like with the reasonable definition, they still have increased a
Yes.
lot
Oh,
in Sweden
quite a lot in
over
the
the
last
last
20
years.
years. Yes, yes. I mean, let's
All
not
I
forget.
know is that I'm dominating the hell out of my computer screen right now.
Whilst running pictures of Swedish women, I presume.
And did you ask its consent?
Hell no.
Well, let's not forget that Sweden changed its rape definition in 2015. But the increase has been noticeable at the very least since 2002. So 13 years before the definition has been changed. So yeah, sure, it may not be the rape capital of the world because they counted the wrong way or the feminist way, but nevertheless, it's been happening a lot more often than it used to happen at the turn of the century. It's just it is what it is. And the article is correct when they say, well, the women can't really wear skirts in Husby. Yeah, that's true, but it's because it's a Sharia-dominated area. It is also, I mean, I can definitely believe that a significant chunk of women feel uncomfortable in Husby. That's probably true. But then again, it's because it's a Sharia-dominated area. I can definitely believe that there aren't too many female entrepreneurs in Husby, which they also complain in this article. I can definitely believe that too, but that is because it's a Sharia-dominated area. Uh, I mean, they got the effects sort of right, but he got the cause entirely wrong.
Yeah, it's also funny how they like studiously avoid mentioning Islam wherever possible. It's like, yeah, it's just sort of these residents, and they have all these Islamic sounding names, but let's not
Not
mention the
just
elephant in the room.
that. Yeah, but the reason I emphasize the names is not just to emphasize that they're not Swedish, but they're all Turkish, which are the least likely Muslim demographic in Sweden to actually bring up religion every once in two sentences. Because if they had chosen the regular Hizbi resident, which is usually Arab, you'll definitely have sentences ending in Allahu Akbar. It's just the way it is. So the individuals quoted in this article are not your average Hizbi resident. They're the absolute exception because there aren't too many Turkish people living in not in Husby. There are many Turkish people living in Stockholm, but not in Husby. Because why? Because the Turks tend to be quite moderate, and they're like, no, we're not moving into a Muslim no-go zone. Thank you very much. We're gonna stay somewhere else, anywhere else. Thank you. So the fact that they were even able to find three different Turkish people to speak to in Husby, it's in itself fantastic. They must have spent an entire day in Husby trying to find these three guys.
Maybe the non-Turks just didn't want to talk about them and just cursed at them in Arabic.
Yeah, that's probably true. And again, this is not an exaggeration. Several news crews have had to contend with with not just with negativity but outright physical violence when they try to speak with people in public spaces in Husby. Most recently, it was an Australian TV crew that had to basically buy a new camera because one of them was smashed against the ground because the Husby residents weren't particularly happy of being videotaped. This is just the way it is, and instead of not just that they're not noticing it, they outright pretend that it doesn't exist, and this article from SVT is a very good example of fake news. Because this is what fake news actually looks like. It's not something that it just claims things didn't happen. That's basically usually what the Onion does. The Onion is a website that writes things that are outright not true. But what fake news is exactly this kind of thing. You take something that is probably true or mostly true, and then spin it to try to avoid what what any person with some knowledge about the situation would actually expect to see, and try to spin it into something entirely different. So in this case, it's the center is patriarchal, so with the solution is feminist urban planning, whereas the reality is that the problem is Islam, it's not the lack of feminist urban planning or whatever nonsense the Social Democrats have concocted yesterday. Yeah. So isn't it nice? And again, I'm looking forward to go exactly there and videotape some stuff. I'll probably have some spare cameras with me in case the residents smash one of them against the ground, which might actually happen. I mean, I'm fully prepared to see that happening.
Right, definitely follow that.
Yeah, I'll go in June. I won't say the exact date because I don't want to get a welcoming committee in Sweden, but nevertheless, I will go, and it is definitely on the table to go visit several of these no-go zones with the hidden camera, and if I get lucky, because the thing is with these kinds of neighborhoods with Husby, same with Rosengård in Malmö, if you get lucky and you come into a nice day, that will be the day when the most violent elements in the neighborhood are away. During that period of the day, they're committing violence somewhere else. Then you can actually videotape and speak with some people with a very minor risk of being assaulted. But those days are very rare, so you have to be very lucky to get there and videotape like a civilized human being with a tripod and with clear images. Otherwise, hidden camera is the way.
Yep.
But don't worry, feminists will save you via feminist urban planning. I mean, I had to check if it's not a joke. And then I thought, oh, hold on a second, it's SVT. So, yeah, SVT is a joke, but they're usually not that witty.
I mean, that is going to combine the word feminist with just like everything. That's feminist economics, feminist snow plowing, feminist everything.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, this is the same city that has feminist snow plowing. We see how that worked out. It worked out very well. It made even the most incompetent mayors across Europe to look like geniuses in comparison with with the glorious program of feminist snow plowing. Yeah. Probably feminist urban planning will pretty much be the same. I mean, I don't know which city in Europe has the most incompetent city architect, but probably that one would still be significantly better than the feminist urban planning applied to Husby. SVT stands for Sveriges Television, but a friend of mine routinely says that SVT actually stands for Statligt Propagandaorgan för Visuellt Hjärntvätt och Tankekontroll, which would be the statist propaganda organ for visual manipulation and thought control. This is basically what this article is. I mean, it's not visual manipulation, but it's definitely thought control. Oh, we can't wear skirts because there is a cafe with many men there. Really? Really? I mean, how do you fight this kind of thing? And this will be the last thing, and then we can wrap this up. But really, how do you fight this thing?
Yeah, I don't know actually. It's I guess you just have to constantly point out the hypocrisy that this.
Yes, but this hypocrisy also comes from a previous train of thought. The idea that street harassment is such a serious. Oh my God! Someone catcalled you. How terrible! And I don't know how to fight that one because my first instinct is to boo fucking who, get over it. That's my first instinct. Because I've been a quote unquote victim of street harassment several times, and that's what I did. Whatever. Just get over it. Is it really that offensive, or well, it is offensive, but I don't care. Is it really that bad or that damaging to encourage individuals to be, adults?
I mean, the vast majority of people and of vast majority of women are adults about that. If they experience any kind of catcalling or something, they don't write a tear-stained article on the Guardian or something about that, they just get over it because it's just something that happens, and it's just something you deal with. Like 99% of people are perfectly sensible about that. But
yes, but the very least sensible of the sensible people are easily influenced by these kinds of columns and these kinds of shenanigans. That's why I'm interested in how to fight these kinds of things, precisely because of this.
Yeah, I think it sort of goes back to this idea that I hit on earlier with these sacred values that we have to protect women as another sacred value, and this idea that male sexuality is really dangerous, and we have to protect women from that. And that's something that I don't think that's something that's necessarily innate. If you look at past societies, we did have this sort of idea that male sexuality can be a very good thing, and also that female sexuality can also be a dangerous thing. But in today's society, we sort of at a point where dangers of female sexuality are sort of downplayed. It's not really taken very seriously. And the dangers of male sexuality, we are sort of hyper aware of that. And that is something that I think, on the one hand, feminism has contributed to that, but also sort of like recent conservative thought that sort of very much emphasizes the idea that male sexuality is dangerous, that that rape is pretty much the worst thing that can possibly happen, and that a woman who is raped is sort of spoiled by that she's now spoiled goods, and no one would want to marry her or something like that. That's an attitude that has been present in some societies in the past, not in others. So it's definitely not something that is like completely innate to our biology. It's something that is culture that we can change through cultural means, but it doesn't mean it's going to be easy to change, or that there's a sort of obvious way of changing that. So just because something is cultural doesn't mean you can just like turn a few switches and write a few laws and then everything is going to be fine.
No, it's probably a much more complex than that.
Yeah, changing culture is really, really hard, and it's not clear that it's a problem that is going to be solvable in the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Best case scenario, our grandchildren might see the first changes in that. Right. I won't be here, neither will James be here next week on April the 21st. 99.9% chance that I will be here on April the 28th. How about you, James?
Yeah, I should be here that day.
Right, Jon?
Yeah, me too.
All right, then with that said, I guess we'll see you all in 2 weeks from now. I guess happy Easter for everyone that does celebrate Easter. I'll celebrate it through work. I'm going to compose new videos. And also, of course, tomorrow I have another regular podcast that I have to attend to. So, I'll just continue working. But then next week, exactly on April 21st, there's definitely no chance that I can end up in time to actually broadcast. So with that, I'm out of things to say.
Yeah, in the meanwhile, I would invite you to take a look at my blog, which is at orthogonalideas.com. See if you find something that's interesting there. And until then, have a good Easter, and see you in 2 weeks. And until then, take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.